Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 240 of Stand Up. Joining me today, Barry Ritholtz and Dr. Buddy Shah, who's the managing director of GiveWell.org. My name is Pete Dominick. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hey, guys. Before anything else, just wanted to let you know I'll be hosting a hangout for stand-up subscribers on Thursday, tomorrow night. That is Thursday the 3rd at 8 p.m. Eastern. Anybody that wants to hang out, I would love to see you because many of us are suffering from some level of fatigue and depression, COVID fatigue, some are calling it now. I think I'm doing pretty well. I don't think it's gotten me too bad. I'm keeping extremely busy and productive, but certainly my wife and daughters are struggling, and many of you are, I'm sure, as well, because yesterday I tweeted, I don't think I suffer from it, but I think hashtag COVID fatigue is real. Helps explain why many of us are just giving up or giving in. Thoughts, ideas? And so many people replied to that on Twitter, many of which are also listeners, subscribers, like Kevin Gorman, who said, I'm using this time to focus on things like reading more and minimizing my clutter, basically slowing down. I honestly have felt a little less stressed knowing that we don't have to run here or there just because we can or should. Kevin, I totally agree. We are, as often we are, I think, connected and on the same page. I'm doing a lot with the minimizing clutter and trying to not having to run all over the place. Really great point. Mom Sheeb on Twitter says, I agree, it's real, COVID fatigue, that it's hard to fight. It makes sense. We can't maintain the level of fear and hypervigilance that we felt in those first few weeks. Our brains have adapted and adjusted for good or ill. Therese says, I miss going out and about without fear, having dinner out. I miss my family. Was planning a road trip to see my brother in North Carolina. Was supposed to have my in-laws down as well as my normal chaotic Thanksgiving of 25 people. The challenge is somehow making it special and fun for my daughters. Lisa on Twitter said, definitely COVID fatigue exists. The more you're privileged, the easier this should be. So many have very little control. The must work outside their homes. Kids need care, which means school. I feel so desperate for working poor. And Matt Elliott writes, the best way to approach COVID is social abstinence, but that's not an option for everyone. And for extroverts, it can drive you nuts. Everyone deals differently, even those who believe science. The fatigue is real. Some people can fight through it, some can't. And a lot more comments that were great on that tweet, and I'd love to hear from you. But we'll talk about it at the Hangout on Thursday night, 8 p.m. If you're a paying subscriber, you can join me there. Sign up to support this podcast and be a part of the community. Go to the paid subscription link in the show notes or patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Okay, lots that I want to discuss and get to. Yesterday was Giving Tuesday, and I am working with GiveWell.org last month and this month to promote the amazing work that they do. And one part of that effort is bringing on their managing director, Dr. Neil Buddy Shah, and I had a really great conversation, and that is coming up after my conversation with Barry Ritholtz, which was fascinating for so many reasons, as always. But I want to play a few things, as I always do here, give you a news dump, and then we'll get to the guests. So let's start with the big news from yesterday, which I think you gotta start with this headline from the Associated Press, who had an exclusive interview with the Attorney General, Bill Barr. And the headline is, Disputing Trump, Barr says no widespread election fraud. Disputing President Donald Trump's persistent baseless claims, Attorney General William Barr declared Tuesday the U.S. Justice Department has uncovered no evidence of widespread voter fraud that could change the outcome of the 2020 election. So, wow, there was so much speculation that Bill Barr was going to go all the way and help overturn the results of the election because he helped the president on so many other things. Nothing he can do here. His hands are tied. There's no evidence of fraud that could change the outcome of the election. I'll talk about that with Barry Ritholtz, and obviously that is major news. I think it blew Lou Dobbs' mind yesterday.
Today, a member of his own cabinet appeared to join in with the radical Dems and the deep state and the resistance. Attorney General William Barr, who has been absent for weeks and weeks, telling the Associated Press that the U.S. attorneys and FBI agents who have followed up on complaints of specific voter fraud across the country have produced nothing. To date, we have not seen fraud on a scale, he said, that could have affected a different outcome in the election. For the Attorney General of the United States to make that statement, he is either a liar or a fool or both.
Uh-oh.
He may be perhaps compromised. He may be simply unprincipled.
What?
Or he may be personally distraught or ill.
What?
But in no way can he honestly stand up before the American people and say that the FBI has, with any integrity or intensity, investigated voter fraud in this country and then say it did not amount to anything.
Yeah, of course they can do that. They definitely can do that because it didn't. They didn't find anything, Lou. They didn't find anything, Lou. What do you want from them? They looked hard. Many of them are Trump supporters, but they didn't find any fraud, Lou. You got to have the evidence of the fraud, Lou. You can't just say there were people and they were pointing and they saw it. You got to have evidence, and they've counted these ballots over and over, Lou, and he keeps losing. Do you ever wonder how a corporate media company like Fox News allows a guy like as deranged, unhinged, and preposterous as Lou Dobbs to keep saying the shit that he does on such a major platform? I mean, it should be reserved for cranks and nuts in their home studios, in their basements, their sheds, garages, and bedrooms, and wherever they're recording their shows, just like me. And you win or lose trust based on your credibility, your experience, your reputation. And, you know, Lou Dobbs would do just fine there, maybe even better. But why does Fox News, why does a corporate company platform a guy like him? Can he be? Does anybody really watch that show? Really? Okay, sorry, done. Sorry, Lou. All right, here's a random guy sitting in his car making a video. He reminded me of, he looked exactly like a listener named Zach Lewis. What's up, Zach? Are you listening today, I hope? Because this guy looked just like you. And he made this video, and I thought I would just grab the audio. It's like 1 minute long, telling his life story. And I just thought it was interesting. Listen.
So, as a former Republican, growing up in Ohio, now living in Texas, been hearing a lot of stuff from the Republican Party that I just want to call BS on. This whole I'm not voting Democrat because of socialism argument. So I'm someone who grew up on welfare. My mom was disabled, had mental health issues, so wasn't able to take care of us, so we needed the system. Didn't know my dad. So luckily, welfare saved my life, frankly. And then I worked hard, fairly hard in school, probably could have done better. Got to college, got accepted. Guess what? Federal grants helped pay part of my way through school. So these socialist programs that everybody's calling out, there's a lot of them out there. They help all of us, not just the people you don't like. So quit using socialism to frankly cover your racism.
Yeah, I don't know that guy's name. Rex Chapman shared that one again, and I don't know what his name was, but white guy. I liked the way what he was saying, the way he said it. Felt bad for him too. Didn't know my dad. I mean, just says that nonchalantly. Anyway, I thought that was worth sharing with you. Another clip I thought I wanted to share. It's kind of fun and funny, lighthearted, of course. Stephen Colbert talking to President Obama, asking him a very important question on the CBS Late Show.
How does Dolly Parton not have a Presidential Medal of Freedom?
That's a mistake.
Yes.
I'm shocked.
Looking back on your 8 years, do you realize that's the mistake you made?
Actually, that was a screw up. I'm surprised. I think I assumed that she had already got one, and that was incorrect.
I assume
I'm surprised she deserves one. I'll call Biden.
I'll call Biden. I love that. Another soundbite I wanted to share with you. The great Dr. Anthony Fauci, now an American hero, at least by hopefully most people's opinion, although many of people think that he's a murderer and a killer and is bad. But anyway, here's a quick clip from Anthony Fauci's interview on Monday on Cheddar TV, which I mainly know from my gas pump. They're like the gas pump network, Cheddar. Here's Dr. Fauci flabbergasted at the behavior of his countrymen.
It's astounding how many people in certain parts of the country still thinks this is a hoax or this is fake news. when you have 250,000 people in this country, more than 250,000, who've already died, and more than 13 million who've been infected. And yet there's still people who believe this is not an important issue.
Yes, indeed there is. I was talking to my friend who's a physician in an ER in West Texas who says that he knows nurses and doctors, they're having holiday parties and they just don't care. I mean, I don't think that's the majority of healthcare workers, but the idea that any would be that way, and it's not just a few, is really hard to imagine and hard to understand. And we can kind of unpack that. We can just ask them what they think. But some people have just given up. They've just given up, and they're just not worried, I guess. There's a real spectrum, isn't there, amongst all of us? Of course, one of the biggest stories yesterday came from an aide to Georgia's Secretary of State, a guy named Gabriel Sterling. He's the top official in the Georgia Secretary of State's office. And yesterday, he came out and condemned President Donald Trump and the state's two Republican senators, Loeffler and Perdue, in a fiery press conference in an echoey space, I think, in the state capitol. He works for, again, the Republican Secretary of State. He himself is considered a conservative Republican, and he opened this press conference, and he was fired up, and this clip went absolutely viral. Everybody was playing this last night. It's longer than what I'm including, but it's about 3 minutes, 20 seconds if you've already heard it. If you haven't, it's worth listening to. Otherwise, you could fast forward, jump ahead.
It has all gone too far. All of it. Joe DeGenova today asked for Chris Krebs, a patriot who ran CISA, to be shot. A 20-something tech in Gwinnett County today has death threats and a noose put out saying he should be hung for treason because he was transferring a report on batches from an EMS to a county computer so he could read it. It has to stop. Mr. President, you have not condemned these actions or this language. Senators, you have not condemned this language or these actions. This has to stop. We need you to step up, and if you're going to take a position of leadership, show some. My boss, Secretary Raffensperger, his address is out there. They have people doing caravans around their house. They've had people come onto their property. Trisha, his wife of 40 years, is getting sexualized threats through her cell phone. It has to stop. This is elections. This is the backbone of democracy, and all of you who have not said a damn word are complicit in this. It's too much. Yes, fight for every legal vote. Go through your due process. We encourage you, use your First Amendment. That's fine. Death threats, physical threats, intimidation. It's too much. It's not right. They've lost the moral high ground to claim that it is. I don't have all the best words to do this because I'm angry. And the straw that broke the camel's back today is, again, this 20-year-old contractor for a voting system company just trying to do his job. Just there. In fact, I talked to Dominion today and I said he's one of the better ones they got. His family's getting harassed now. There's a noose out there with his name on it. And it's not right. I've got police protection outside my house. Fine. You know, I took a higher profile job. I get it. Secretary ran for office. His wife knew that too. This kid took a job. He just took a job. And it's just wrong. I can't begin to explain the level of anger I have right now over this. And every American, every Georgian, Republican and Democrat alike should have that same level of anger. Mr. President, it looks like you likely lost the state of Georgia. We're investigating. There's always a possibility. I get it. And you have the rights to go through the courts. What you don't have the ability to do, and you need to step up and say this, is stop inspiring people to commit potential acts of violence. Someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to get shot. Someone's going to get killed. And it's not right.
You got to wonder how much difference that made. You got to wonder where that guy has been, if he's always been critical of Donald Trump, because he's been putting people in danger for over 4 years now with his horrific, harsh, violent, vengeful rhetoric. But nonetheless, Gabriel Sterling coming out and without any kind of prepared comments there and just laying it out, and that went viral. I wonder if it'll make any difference. I wonder how it makes any difference. I wonder how the Georgia runoff election will be affected by his comments or anything else, including the president's tweets, who's basically saying there's no reason to vote, he said in some ways about the Georgia runoff election on Monday in tweets. And here's a story that I feel like is not getting enough attention, but with fewer than 60 days until President-elect Joe Biden takes office, the Trump administration has set an unprecedented record of scheduling the most federal inmates for execution during the last leg of a presidential term. That's right. Here is more from CNN.com. Attorney General William Barr resumed federal executions in July 2019 after a 17-year hiatus to, quote, bring justice to victims of the most horrific crimes. Just to be clear, the federal government had not executed anybody for 17 years. But despite legal attempts for extensions to complete clemency petitions, requests for reprieve, commutation, or clemency, and appeals to the Supreme Court, 8 federal inmates have been put to death so far this year, and 5 more are scheduled to be executed, 2 within days of Biden's swearing-in ceremony. And so Chris Hayes on MSNBC last night had the great Brian Stevenson on his show, and he asked Brian Stevenson, the author of Just Mercy, which they've made a movie about, who has gotten more innocent people off of death row, I think, than any other lawyer. Chris Hayes asked him for a little background on the federal government's capital punishment policy and what changed with Donald Trump taking office.
Well, there were tremendous questions about the reliability and the credibility of many of these death sentences. And so most prosecutors had been trying to resolve those issues. And then we've seen in the last several months this rush to execute. And it's really catastrophic. I've often argued that the death penalty can't be understood by asking the question, do people deserve to die for the crimes they've committed? The threshold question surrounding the death penalty is, do we deserve to kill? Does our system, do our decision makers have the integrity, the credibility, the fairness needed to exercise this extraordinary power? The American people have given the United States government the power to kill. It's the most extraordinary power a government official has, and they expect that power to be exercised reliably, fairly. And what we've seen is a really dramatic example of reckless political use of this power in a way that is unprecedented in American history. These executions are being expedited on a schedule for political points. And I just have to say that I don't think I've seen more dramatic evidence about why the death penalty should be abolished. I'm hoping that the Biden administration will help Congress get to abolition, because we've now seen that our Justice Department and our government can't be trusted with something this extraordinary when it's going to be used as recklessly as we're seeing it being used today.
Yeah, Brian Stevenson also went on to say something I did not know that the Trump administration had done, which prepare yourself to be more outraged. Listen to this.
This Department of Justice and the president have actually authorized new methods of execution. They're actually trying to get rules adopted that would allow the United States to execute people by firing squads, and even more shamefully, would allow this country in 2020 to replicate the method of execution that the Nazis used to kill millions of Jewish people in World War II. They want to put people in gas chambers and suffocate them. And this is all spectacle. It's not really about justice. It's not about fairness. It's about demonstrating power. And it's tragic because there are these really important questions that we have to be answering before we execute people.
All right, and there's a lot more to that. I highly recommend you follow, read everything that Brian Stevenson and his organization, the Equal Justice Initiative, does every day. That's EJI.org. And the last big story that I want to mention before I get to the rapid-fire news dump is going back to where we started with the Department of Justice and the Attorney General. Apparently, Trump associates, including Rudy Giuliani, have been asking for pardons. And more importantly, that's one story. A different story is that the Department of Justice, news broke late on Tuesday, is investigating potential White House bribery for pardon scheme and there's a lot of speculation as to who might want to be paying, who's in jail that is trying to pay for a pardon. Who is it? Is it Maxine GiveWell, Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend? Huh? Bill Cosby? Who is it? Who's getting the pardon? Paul Manafort? Rick Gates? A lot of people trying to play the guessing game yesterday. Suppose we'll soon find out. Maybe never, but probably. All right, now it's time for your news dumps. News dumps.
They call them dumps, big, massive dumps.
Let's start with some business headlines from CNBC. 9 months after health and economic crisis began, unemployment claims near record high. Unemployment benefits are flowing to workers in a volume that is near record set before the coronavirus pandemic. Elevated figures for continued and initial claims reflect economic and financial pain almost 9 months into the COVID crisis. And speaking of economic headlines or financial headlines or, I don't know, deals from TechCrunch, Salesforce has bought Slack for $27.7 billion in a mega deal. Salesforce recently surpassed $20 billion in annual revenue, announced today it was wading deeper into enterprise social by acquiring Slack in a $27.7 billion mega deal. All right. That's a lot of money, I don't imagine. I can't imagine how much money that is. All right. So also, China, they landed a probe on the moon. Their Chang'e 5 moon mission probe has touched down. And I guess they're collecting samples of rock and dust to bring back to Earth. I'm sure that's all they're doing. And it sounds super productive and really expensive. In international news, sticking with it, Germany has banned a far-right pro-Nazi group, and police raided homes. More than 180 police officers raided homes in 3 German states. I think we have audio of it. Und ein Stick liegen! Sorry, I apologize. They've gone after a group that wanted to reestablish a Nazi dictatorship and abolish democracy. Well, that's great. Stay classy, Germany. The U.S. women's soccer team has settled part of their gender discrimination suit. The U.S. Soccer Federation reached a proposed settlement with the women's national team in legal battle over working conditions, but dispute over equal pay with that of their male counterparts does continue. 41 people have tested positive after a swingers event in New Orleans, apparently. 41 people that were at a big event. Apparently, they got COVID. What a surprise. Great job, everybody. Hooking up with strangers. Speaking of which, an anti-gay Hungarian politician has resigned after being caught by the police when he was leaving a 25-man orgy. He jumped out of a window. This guy's anti-gay Hungarian politician, and he was at an orgy with like 25 other guys. But that's not gay. I mean, only unless you were just doing anal. I mean, blowing guys, like a lot of guys, that's not gay. I'm not gay. That would make me gay. Yep. What just happened? All right, that's it. That is your news dump. Let me get to my first guest. Joining me here first is the great Barry Ridholtz. You know him, you love him. He's one of your all-time favorites. He is an author. He is a blogger. He is a manager of a financial firm. He hosts a podcast. You can see him on TV. He's awesome on Twitter at Ritholtz. Check out his podcast, Masters in Business. We had an awesome conversation. The conversation began with his efforts to lose weight over the Jewish holidays and how that manifested. It's an interesting scheme that he and some of his family members came up with. And then we talked about Vice President or President-elect Joe Biden's economic team, and I asked him about 3 of his most brilliant blog posts about behavior and productivity, and we talked about a bunch of other things as well. We had a great conversation, as we always do, and here it is right now, Barry Ridholtz.
All right, so I think it was Rosh Hashanah. It was one of the Jewish holidays. Me, my sister's family, and my brother's family are all having a holiday dinner at my sister's apartment on the Upper East Side. And all the kids are there. There's like, I don't know, 5, it's like 14 of us or something. And somebody says something about weight. my nephew, my 25-year-old nephew, who's like 6'4", says something about weight. And I'm like, and I laugh. I go, dude, you got nothing to say to me. You lost all this weight for your wedding. You put it all back and then some. To which my brother laughs at me mocking our nephew. And I'm like, dude, you're the last one of us to say anything about weight. You're the fattest I've ever seen you. If you were a stock, you would declare a 3-for-1 split. That's how much your numbers have gone up.
That's mean.
So my brother-in-law, who's the thinnest of all of us, marched us all into the bathroom. We all weigh ourselves.
Yes.
And my brother was the most I think I've ever. He definitely was the most we've ever seen.
Yikes.
We make a $20 a pound bet for 6 months forward, which was supposed to be like April 10th. But
$20 a pound. All right. So if you lost 10 pounds, it's $200. 20 pounds.
Well, but if the other guy lost 9 pounds, you only win 20.
Okay. All right.
And it's 3 ways. So everybody puts into the pot.
Did someone give you this idea? This is a great idea.
No, just,
All right, go ahead.
I'm creative that way. So someone else must have done that somewhere in history. So fast forward, March, the lockdown begins. We're not going to get together for the April weigh-in. We all agree to hold it in abeyance, the weigh-in, and we say we'll roll it over till September, as if we'll all be out and about in September. And then September, we rolled it over again till January. But here's the crazy part. Since I know I'm not in a bet and I'm not going to have the weigh-in for months and months, and because we're stuck at home all the time, I fancy myself a half decent. I'm pretty good in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So we start.
I've had your cooking. It was very good. I really enjoyed the meal you made me.
Right. So I know my way around a barbecue. I know my way around a kitchen. I have a bunch of cookbooks, and now we're stuck at home. And normally I'm commuting into the city and coming home. My wife does all the cooking. Since I'm no longer have the excuse that, hey, by the time I get home, it's too late for me to cook. I take over all the cooking duties at home. And I am now cooking 3 meals a day, nothing but fresh food, nothing prepared, no restaurants, no frozen food.
That is impressive.
And eating a ton of food and losing weight. That's the funny part. So how is that possible? Well, we're eating salad with every dinner. The food is fresh. There's nothing prepared. There's nothing processed. And more importantly, nobody is giving you a portion like when restaurants serve food, they're not serving what they think is a human portion. They're serving what will get this person back to the restaurant again. So rather than serve a normal portion, it's a double or a portion and a half. Right. And we're all basically, you put a plate in front of us. We were all taught there are starving kids around the world, finish your plate. So we all have a tendency to.
Yeah.
So I lose like 10, 12 pounds in the first 3-4 months of lockdown.
That's awesome.
Absolutely not hungry, eating all the time.
Yeah.
But like eating fruit and whatever.
Eating healthier, more efficiently, being happy and losing weight. That's hard to do. A big accomplishment.
So then last month, really in October, we were supposed to start the kitchen renovation in March. That got postponed when by August, all the materials start coming in again. And in October, we start on the kitchen. We've been in this house for over 6 years, and the kitchen was the original horrific 1983 4-mic, just terrible. And in the month and a half that the kitchen renovation has been underway, I put all the weight back on.
No.
Because we're essentially doing nothing but takeout. It's all takeout.
But there's still time for you to
once the kitchen is done, I'm going right back to what I was doing.
That's
only with a nicer gas stovetop instead of
because you've been eating takeout. That's why.
Yeah, it's all takeout.
And is that but they're still generally probably pretty healthy, pretty fresh places. Is it just bigger portions in general?
Pizza, Chinese food, sushi.
Yeah.
The local pub, take out wings and salad. It's more wings than salad. And it's also you can't eat the same crap over. You're constantly give me something. When you're cooking, hey, you could give me the same 20 ingredients and I can make 1,000 different things. Just a little bit more of some cumin here and some garlic there, and it's a totally different dish. takeout is takeout, and there's only so much variety. Even if you're trying to be good, like sushi, throw in the gyoza. What the hell? So
I hear you, and it's very honest of you to share all that, and also a pretty creative idea. I love it. I wanted to ask you, you've got 3 really good pieces on the blog that I want to talk about. Everybody should go to Ritholtz.com. The big picture, everybody. But before we get to it, I do want to ask you about what you think about here the transition. We've heard some of Joe Biden's nominees for certain positions. I obviously want to get your take on all positions that affect economics and finance and so on. We have Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and
that was a great pick. I saw the usual lunatics objecting to it.
Were they on the left, right? It's interesting to watch
both.
The left right now.
I mean, I think the left is okay.
I'm not interested in watching the right. Anybody on the right at all. I can care less about what they think based on the fact that they, confirmed nominations that they did for Trump.
In economics, left and right is different than in politics. I mean, there's some overlap, but when you talk about left and right in economics, you're often talking about hard money zealots, people who think the dollar should be backed by gold. Just all sorts of mayhem that I don't think really is especially
well, you're talking
about
a difference in morality, really, as well as evidence-based arguments on economics in general, right? You're talking about, on the right, they're conspiratorial. They believe that tax cuts grow the economy. It's all bullshit, not to mention the Fed and deficits and so on. All those economic theories are like, we even paying attention to those anymore? That's the right. And even furthermore, on the right, morally, it's like, what do you think government's role should be? Whereas the rest of us, I think we have a pretty hearty debate.
So what I've seen on the right,
is that too dismissive?
You have to recognize which debates are nonsense, which arguments are nonsense, and strike them down immediately. And so, I had written about this 2 years ago. I called them the faux deficit chicken hawks.
Yeah, you've written about this extensively.
That when they're out of power, the deficit is the worst thing in the world. But while they're in power, deficits don't matter. Hey, elections have consequences. So you are already seeing the bullshit anti-deficit nonsense come out of the right. You've seen it from Art Laffer. You've seen it from The Hill,
who's a joke
which is
and
supposed to be a
seriously.
centrist site. But I find it kind of center right, and I find a lot of their arguments just
a lot of
bullshit.
they post a lot of horseshit opinion pieces, I think.
Yeah.
But Art Laffer should not be considered a serious person. You would tell you have. I trust
Bruce
your opinion.
Bartlett would certainly agree with you. Well, our mutual friend Bruce Bartlett.
That's why I think. That's why I think I have this opinion. So would I like Hartman? What's his name?
Or Austin Goolsbee, for that matter. But would not buy into it. So you could tell, and I think we were too sanguine about this. The people who supported the Bush tax cuts and the Iraq invasion suddenly became deficit hawks under Obama. And I think, there have been some positive takeaways from the Trump experience, which we'll talk about in a future conversation. But one of the takeaways has been, one of the positives have been belatedly and insufficiently, but eventually the media figured out how to deal with bullshit. And you'll notice it's what various people call a truth sandwich. And the truth sandwich is if you just say something is a lie and you try and debunk it, the boomerang effect has people believing it even more than they originally did. You can't just say, oh, the election was fraud. You need to put in a truth sandwich. And a truth sandwich is something like, despite the head of the cybersecurity and election overseer saying this was the safest, most reliable election in American history, the president is claiming fraud. He has not produced any evidence for fraud.
Right.
In fact, all of his court cases have been thrown out, but one, and that one allowed observers to move from 10 feet to 6 feet.
And of course, the Department of Justice
33 in litigation. And as far as anybody can tell, that's a truth sandwich.
Right.
A statement, starting out with a truthful statement, the bullshit in the middle, wrapping it up with a truthful statement. Psychologically, that doesn't lead to people believing, because fact checking is almost counterproductive the way it's done. Eventually, the media figured it out.
I love your explanation on that, Truth Sandwich. But getting back to the economic appointment.
Sure.
So Janet Yellen.
Good pick. Experienced, savvy, highly regarded by people on both sides of the aisle. I think the job of Federal Reserve Chairman is more powerful and has less political,
right? Which is her old job
that you have to do.
Yeah.
Versus Treasury Secretary, where you're dealing with the House, you're dealing with the Senate, you're dealing with the various, you're running a giant department. Treasury is thousands and thousands of workers. There's so many different things under Treasury. It's crazy. I believe the IRS is under Treasury. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think, is under Treasury. It's just a massive, massive department, all this stuff. So, but she's good. She ran the Fed, so she knows how to run a big organization. Now the challenge is going to be dealing with a Senate that's going to perhaps be less friendly, depending on what happens in Georgia.
It'll be really interesting just to watch the way that she behaves, given that her last job was chairman of the Fed, which, as you just mentioned, is not a political job, generally speaking.
Well, it is.
Well, it is, but they seem to, even Trump's Fed chairmen seem to be very low key. They don't give interviews. They don't do a lot of commentary.
Jerome Powell has, there's another thing we'll discuss off in the future in that conversation, which is the surprising resiliency of American institutions. As much as the noise day to day has been so annoying and just un-American and even treasonous at times, the institutions have withstood the challenge. And, to some degree, some of that's because Trump is not the most competent executive, but it also says something about how well designed these institutions
I think I would generally agree if we're going to be general about it, but I do wonder what you think about, yes, they survived. Yes, they did in many ways what we hoped that they would do, especially the courts here in the end with this bullshit about the election.
But how damaged are they?
But yes. How damaged are the reputation of the institutions that you say survived? That matters.
We'll find out
what the public thinks.
I think it's too early to tell.
Yeah. So Biden's appointments, other appointments to his economic team. Anybody else that you wanted to mention that's worth mentioning in the conversation with me today, from Neera Tanden?
I don't understand what the beef is about the woman who they nominated to be head of OMB.
Director of Office of Management and Budget, Neera Tanden.
They said she had some tweets that were mean.
Well, she was very critical. She's been very critical of Bernie Sanders and his campaign. She's also was critical of the last election and insinuated that the Russians influenced it to the point that they might have even changed votes.
We know the Russians tried to influence it. We don't know how successful they were.
I haven't read that much. I know her from running. She ran the Center for American Progress, which people can decide
left of center for sure
how they feel about that think tank. Yeah, definitely left of center, but not left enough for a lot of people. And I think that's the main knock on her, is that she was very anti-Bernie.
Goddamn, too centrist.
So anybody else though? I'll be talking about her, I'm sure, with other guests.
The whatchamacallit,
the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors is Celia Rouse. Jared Bernstein, Heather Boucher are members of the Council of Economic Advisors.
Jared.
I don't know what the hell any of these people really even do in those jobs, but
they help shape policy and they advise the president. And those are important jobs. It's kind of interesting. The communications office, after the parade of people we've seen blow through that, one liar after another, except my friend Mooch, who was fired for telling the truth to a reporter about what a clusterfuck it was. That's pretty much why you got shit canned. It will be nice to see media professionals there not coming out to gaslight America and basically blow smoke up everybody's ass. I mean, nobody wants to use the Nazi comparison, but this has been just 4 years of bullshit. It's shocking. Starting with Inauguration Day, the greatest crowd ever.
Yeah.
By the way, 306, the greatest landslide ever. It just, it's amazing how lacking in character the outgoing president was, and what's amazing is how many people just bent to his will. There's just so little spine in D.C. It's a jelly spine
on everything from the impeachment to the actual election, bending to his will, and
traitors and assholes. Yeah. Oh my! It's just. Yeah. Think about how. You know who I give a lot of credit to? The guy who was Trump's appointment to be head of cybersecurity.
Chris Krebs, I played him on yesterday's podcast. He seems fantastic. Like got a lot of integrity, real smart lawyer.
Yeah, he stood up and said, hey, this was a legit election. I'm sorry, I'm not going to lie to assuage your tiny little ego.
Yeah, and he was, that 60 Minutes piece was great. He was like, we were in basically a situation room like space. We had people from FBI, from Homeland Security, from everywhere watching this election to make sure there wasn't any intervention, right. any hacking, et cetera. Right. And, it came out clean. And then Bill Barr, of course, today, Bill Barr saying, I didn't see any major fraud, no evidence of fraud anywhere. And so,
well, by the way, you notice what Barr said. Barr's still a weasel.
Yeah.
He said there was not sufficient evidence of fraud to overturn the election results. Like he still had to blow a little kiss to the toddler in chief. What he should have said is, there's no evidence of fraud because as far as we can tell, there was no fraud, accept your loss and move on. When you look around the country, even Governor Ducey, who I thought was a kiss ass suck up in Arizona, basically said to Trump, hey, the people of Arizona voted.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to certify this. What's astonishing is the lack of pushback to the president of the United States saying, fuck democracy. Don't approve what your own voters do. Like nobody is responding to how absolutely insane that is. I don't see enough of people saying, hey, comrade, in America, the voters pick the president.
Well,
the other way around.
The converse of that, and you juxtaposed the statements from Bill Barr. We don't see any enough fraud to overthrow any state's election, affect the outcome of any state's election. Okay, fine, but the better statement did come from Chris Krebs, who said this was the most secure election in American history, 2020. Right. And here's the thing, government doesn't do a great job at this, and they're really not designed to tout their achievements. Every secretary of state, if they do a good job, if they're good at their job, they have an election takes place, and it's free and fair, and there's access, and it's counted accurately. If you succeed, tout the hell out of that. And basically, that's what a lot of them are doing. Like, listen, it wasn't the outcome I wanted, but it was clean. Sorry, clean fight.
Right. So you had the governor of Georgia stepping and the secretary of state of Georgia, both Republicans stepping up. You had
Trump called the secretary of state the enemy of the state, Barry. You know how damaging that is? Guy who donated to his campaign.
Right. He actually wrote an op-ed in the USA Today saying, I voted for, me and my family voted for Trump. We donated to him, and he still threw us under the bus. The most shocking takeaway of all this. Oh, and who was this idiot who called for Krebs to be shot at dawn?
That's a guy named Joe DeNova. He's on Trump's campaign lawyer team. He was on Newsmax.
So I think if I was advising Krebs, I would say file as many lawsuits as you can against him, and then file a claim on with the Bar Association wherever he's authorized, admitted to the bar. Because this person, and the same with Sidney Lunatic working with Giuliani, these people are not qualified to be officers of the court. You want to go out as a public person and say crazy shit, go ahead. We'll just mute you on Twitter. But if you're an officer of the court in the middle of litigation making claims, you can't go out and talk about stuff that is false and is false.
I don't want to go off on too far a tangent, but that's also the difference between being a talk show host on the radio or on YouTube like Mark Levin or Sean Hannity and being a lawyer and a judge in a court. You can say whatever the hell you want, make a case, and they do to Republican legislators. Why don't you do something? Mark Levin says, and they're like, I can't. What do you mean? There's nothing I can do.
I'll tell you why. This comes back to the issue of the institutions being resilient. And that was the whole joke of the non-zero number of counters in the room. When you are in court, there's a lot of leeway to your judgment and opinion matter. And when a judge asks you a question, judges in America are the last landed gentry. Like a judge, I don't care if you're the attorney general, the judge could throw you in jail in contempt and you then have to go get a writ of habeas corpus to be removed, but you're spending the night in jail until that shows up. So when the judge says to the lawyer, you alleged fraud, but I don't see anything in the papers. Is there any fraud? Are you making a claim for fraud? It's like, well, no.
Right.
Well, you said there were, the client said there was 0 observers in the room. How many of the president's campaign observers were in the room? There was a non-zero number of people, which is a way of saying, well, of course there were people in the room. But if you say there weren't and evidence comes in, it's not just that you lose the case. You're going to be sanctioned. You're going to pay fines. And I've seen judges call people into, chambers and basically say, you have exactly 1 hour to make this right, or I'm going to turn this over to the Bar Association and recommend you're suspended.
Oh, wow. Really? Well,
judges don't fuck around. I mean, if you've ever been in court, it is no bullshit. There is no fooling around, which is why all of these bullshit
and they're
claims,
in that robe and they're higher than you and they have a hammer. The whole situation is intimidating.
Please rise when the judge enters. This is
the whole dynamic is rigged.
This is not just, this is not just old trappings. This person has control over your future.
Law and order. Law and order. So it's
so crazy stuff.
Well, and the argument, of course, that Trump is making is Joe Biden has to prove that he got the votes, not
it doesn't work that way.
That Trump has to prove that there was
did not mischief. Make that argument in court. You could what you say on Twitter, what the crazies say at night on Fox is not admissible evidence. And I think there were 1 for 32 or 1 for 33, whatever it was. It was pretty wild. So anyway, that's the next couple of pieces that I'm working on. I think it's a fascinating topic.
Well, speaking of fascinating topics, I've got 3 blogs entries of yours at the Big Picture, Ritholtz.com, that I want to talk about. They are all fascinating topics, and I want to try to get through them. The first piece here I want to talk about is dealing with COVID and where we are at right now.
Yes.
And you have a great way of looking at this and providing perspective in this piece titled The Halfway Point. It's very good. I really enjoyed reading it. It helped me understand and have perspective. What was your approach? What gave you this idea for this piece? The Halfway Point.
So basically the lockdown began in March. And in November, we had a slew of different virus vaccine updates from Pfizer, from Moderna, from AstraZeneca. Those are the 3 leading candidates that are expected to be out pretty quickly. In fact, Pfizer is 20 million doses this month, 25 next month, 30 in February. And so I just did a little research and figured out from all the public statements about when we will have had sufficient vaccines outside so that you can feel comfortable resuming your normal life. And back of the envelope, rough calculation was somewhere around June, right? By the way, this isn't anything any of the companies said. This isn't hard science. This was just, 6-7 months is about
You're using the best information you can to create a time frame. And I think it's as good as anybody would say. And I think experts would look at it and be like, yeah, that's
I'm not betting the house on that, but I think that's a fair number.
Sure.
And, I kind of I like numbers. And so I sat and I just sort of thought, well, if we started in March and we end in June, that's, inclusive of all the months, that's 16 months, 8 months past March is November. Oh my God, we're literally at the halfway point. And so I looked back from March till now, and in the first half of the lockdown, you have no idea how long this is going to last. You have no idea how dangerous and serious this is. So it's dangerous, but it's less dangerous in some ways than we thought and more dangerous in other ways. And your whole lifestyle changes to adapt to be safe, to keep you and your family safe. So the thought is, and I did a lot of stuff I wanted to do, but there's a lot of stuff I didn't get to. And I stopped and I thought, well, if we're at the halfway point, You know, this is the time to go into the locker room and get the team all roused up. What do I want to look back at from June? Project yourself forward in time. Hey, the lockdowns are over. The vaccine is widely distributed. People are out and about. What do I want to look back to 8 months of forced living at home and say I got accomplished?
I love what you wrote here. I'm just going to read it. You wrote, imagine someone came to you and said the following: you'll be locked up at home with only limited ability to travel locally for 6 months to a year. You can do whatever you want over that period. What would you want the results of that soft incarceration to be? And you've been thinking about this, and you provide a lot of perspective, given into consideration that not everybody is obviously able to work from home and so on. I think that's fair,
right,
that we understand. But you say you bring this up because the midpoint creates a chance to think about our own habits, goals, experiences, and a word that begins with D I've never seen in my life. It looks Latin. What is that? Diodamnatus? Diodamnatus, you wrote?
Oh.
The hell is that?
It's Latin for damn it.
Oh, never knew that. Even our lives,
Google it.
And what we want to accomplish with them. And the recognition of this, you say, Barry, should spur you to think about how fruitfully or not, I like that, you choose to spend your time.
Yeah, if you decide that, hey, I work my ass off all the time and 6 months more of not having to tote that barge and lift that bale or whatever it is, that, you know, that's a choice some people might make either voluntarily or involuntarily. I have a very different attitude, which is life is short. What do you want to accomplish? And I have stuff I want to do. And so I put together a list that covered a bunch of things. We talked about cooking earlier. I mentioned, and we're in mid-kitchen renovation. I got a couple of new cookbooks, including one that I'm really fascinated by, which is salt, acid, fat, sweet. I forgot the name, but it's really a fascinating way to think about how flavors interact, how food interacts.
But basically, you wrote this list of how I'm hoping to spend my extra free lockdown time. And you say, of course, note all this aside from your professional life. So you're suggesting people I love this. It's so helpful for me.
Think about how much time people lose commuting. I mean, my commute isn't bad, but it's still 10 hours a week. I know people commute 20 hours a week. That commute time is now recaptured. What are you going to do with, the next 250 to 500 free hours you get? That's a big chunk of time that you normally don't have.
I love it. You say, think about how unique this situation is, how rare an opportunity it presents for you, and then go take full advantage of it. What do you want this period to have meant to you? Do not lead a life full of regrets and unrequited interests. What do you want to do with the next 8 months of your life is such a great question. I love this blog. I hope people share it widely and read it. And I'll say this, just real quick, you have your list. One thing that Val and I are really trying to make happen is we're trying to take off. Our daughters are in 7th and 10th grade. They're never going to have an opportunity, most likely, hopefully, to have to do remote learning. Why stay here in the dead of winter, especially since my wife hates winter? I don't mind it as much. So we're thinking of going down to the Atlanta area where we have a whole community of friends at Sarah and B and staying there for at least a month.
Right.
What do you think of that? Too risky?
I had a friend who a month ago just was up in Martha's Vineyard.
You can go anywhere.
Season. Right. It's just like just a change.
Anywhere. Yeah. This will never be this opportunity again while our kids are at this age, And I mean, I can work from anywhere. My wife can kind of work from anywhere. So why the hell not? That's our dream, our fantasy. We're trying to make happen.
One of the things that motivated me to do that is, the whole Groundhog Day sensation of, the sameness of it every day in the same place. What are you doing? What's different? It's every day I write up and print up a list of my things to do. And every day I do another one. And what I don't cross off the list, I roll over to the next day.
Wow.
And there's just a sameness to everything. And so, we're bored. We're frustrated. It's getting dark earlier. It's getting colder. All the leaves are off the trees. It's like, I don't want to succumb. I don't want to allow myself to get sucked into that negative, dreary winter under best of circumstances.
Right.
And now with the lockdown, the potential of this being terrible was there. And so I was trying to be proactive to head off that sort of.
You were, and it's super helpful, and you're helping yourself and helping so many others while you're at it. Barry Ridholtz.
Thank you.
Okay, blog piece number 2 I want to discuss with you. You just posted at Ritholtz.com, the big picture, the bargain hunter's dilemma. Another fascinating piece about behavior and psychology, and I don't know how to describe this, but the one line I like that helps describe it in here is there are ways to manage the lure of consumerism. Where did this idea for a piece come from? What were you struggling with here?
So I grew up kind of lower middle class, kind of poor, put myself through college, cheap state school, took out a bunch of loans to put myself through grad school, and then did a career change when I was 30. So, the first half of my adult life and most of my childhood, pretty hard scrabble, not a lot of cash. And the past 10, 15 years, that changed, right? Really go back to the mid 2000s. I'm one of the people that the financial crisis was good to me. I was in the right place at the right time. I called it right. It brought a lot of business to me. It wasn't like a calculated, let me just sit back and wait for a global clusterfuck and I'll nail that and it'll bring a lot of money to me. It just kind of happened. And so, there's a concept in personal finance known as the hedonic treadmill. The hedonism, a hedonic adjustment is what's the value of a passenger car? Well, there are ways to calculate it by retail price and this and that. But can you compare a passenger car in 2020 to 2000 to 1980? And so they make these hedonic adjustments. For example, an entry-level Honda Civic today has things that a Civic 30 years ago didn't have. It has ABS, it has airbags, it has, seatbelt tensioners, it has crumple zones.
And it's hot looking, it's sporty. I like those Civics. Go ahead.
Right. But I'm talking about an inexpensive entry-level Honda that has all of the safety features that the best Volvos and Mercedes had 25 years ago. So how do you adjust that? So the hedonic treadmill is the tendency that whatever thrill you get from spending money on stuff, it's like you got to look for a vein. You need a bigger hit each and every time. And so people who start early in their career making some money and go out and piss a lot of money away on baubles, and, we all have a tendency to do that, they get on the hedonic treadmill and you can't get off because they just never get ahead. It's always bigger, more.
It's never enough.
Right. And despite making more and more money, they never seem to save. They're always in debt. So anyway, I kind of see it from two perspectives by accident of birth. I'm like really the valley between the baby boomers who are all older than me, born in the late 40s and 50s, to the Gen Xers who were born like mid 60s and later. I sort of fall in between. And the boomers, probably the most materialistic generation in history. They were lucky. They got to capture all of the real estate appreciation, that big surge that took place in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Very prestige focused, very keep up with the Jones. And I kind of, throughout my life, always sort of felt the lure of that, but never fully fell into it. I have a nice house. I have a nice car, blah, blah, blah. But everything I own, I can afford with plenty of space. I could have afforded a bigger car. I could have afforded a more expensive house. I've mostly, not mostly, because of my wife, I've always lived within my means. We've always been very moderate in our spending. Although, the past couple of years, I picked up some toys here and there. And so it was Black Friday and I was just thinking about that. And I remembered this thing I did a long time ago when I really first started getting money. One of the things I pointed out, I went to grad school in New York, in Manhattan, and I lived in Manhattan a good couple of years after that, another, 15 years after that, 10 years after that. And, Manhattan is kind of an interesting city to be poor in because there's a ton of stuff you can do for free.
Right.
You can get into museum nights on Fridays. There's no charge. And there are all these live events that are free. And, so you rent poor, but it doesn't matter. Even food. When I was a grad student, I still remember Mamoon's over on University. You could get a falafel sandwich and a soda. I think.
You can find your places. I think that's
$2,
true.
right? Yeah. Cheap and cheerful.
Groceries are always expensive, but you can find affordable.
It was cheaper to go to a local. We would go down to St. Mark's and 6th Street. The Indian restaurants, there's literally a whole street of Indian restaurants. You couldn't spend $20. It was impossible. It was too much food. Like that would feed 4 people. And so the problem, so you learn to be a savvy bargain hunter. You learn how to make your money go as far as it can. The problem, and this is me looking at the world through a lens of psychology. The problem is we all tend to want what we can't have. And that's just a very human behavior. And when you're broke, you can't have a lot of things. And so it creates this, Madison Avenue knows how to push those buttons. It creates a desire for things you may not even want, you may not even desire. And so I remember reading this fascinating thing about clothes. Take all the clothes in your closet and that are on hangers. And instead of normally you hang them away from you, the hook goes like this, flip them around and hang them towards you.
Okay.
And wait a year. Whenever you wear a piece of clothing, take it off the hanger. When you're done, throw it in the hamper. But as soon as you take it off the hanger, put the hanger the normal way, facing away from you. And a year goes by and you realize, at least I realized, 80% of my clothes I don't wear. I wear the same shirts over and over again. Right. I wear the same pants over and over again. I have like a wall full of ties. I wear the same 2 or 3 ties over and over again. And so it made me stop to think about how we shop and how we almost treat materialism like a sport, sport shopping. And this is about 15 years ago. I came to the conclusion, I'm not going to buy anything unless I really want it. And I'm not going to look what's on sale and get a bunch of stuff and buy it. I'm going to look at a bunch of stuff, and if I really like it, I'm going to buy it regardless of price. And P.S., if I buy anything new, I have to give away 2 old things. I just empty out the closet of the crap I don't wear.
Sure.
And so I found myself not caring. Now, you have to have at least a little financial needs to do this, but it's probably cheaper in the long run to not buy bargain crap that's going to fall apart, to not buy the cheapest, least expensive thing, because there is something to be said for quality. But more importantly, you're only buying the things you really, really like. And if it's on sale, it shouldn't affect whether or not you desire it. We have a tendency to do the opposite. It's on sale and I can afford it, therefore I want it, which is the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, or I think the only thing you don't answer is if a way to kill time or hobby or interest is to actually go shopping on an Amazon or even on a Facebook marketplace, and then you find things that you weren't even thinking about that you wanted or needed, but if they're marketed at you, obviously. But I mean,
listen, if you want to do that, if you want to go, if you just like, I have this, it's called Zillow surfing. People who are stuck at home go on Zillow and look at houses along the water or up by the ski area or by the lake.
I've done that many times.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
The problem comes when people start buying things they don't want, don't need, can't afford. Not only is it wasteful for, the entire society, but it's not a good use of your money.
I do think there is something a little bit wrong with Zillow surfing. I find every time, which is the idea of having a sense of a feeling of envy. And not realizing how good you've got it where you are at, and how you only be happy when you have this kind of house and this kind of place. Although I don't want to go to,
the law of diminishing returns kicks in very, very quickly.
Right.
My favorite example of this, and this will date me, is so I grew up really liking stereos and great sound systems. Nobody gives a crap. Good enough beat really good. The sound quality of the audio in your phone. hey, it's 100,000 songs. It doesn't have to be that great. It's endless, plus streaming. But I always used to be fascinated that, $100 speakers sound pretty good. $500 speakers sound much better. $2,000 speakers, even better. But, how much better are $10,000 speakers than 2,000? Right. Well, they're a little better, but are they 5 times better? What about the $100,000 speakers? You understand speakers, you could drop $250,000 on audio speakers. And it's just, the same thing happens in the high end of automobiles. To get the next 1/10 of a second faster costs you $250,000.
This is what I'll say about houses and cars, though, and this is what I'm experiencing, is you want, generally speaking, unless you have a really passionate hobby and great skill at home improvement and fixing things, you want cars and homes that you won't have to spend a lot of time dealing with things breaking. Even if you have resources and you can hire someone to fix them, that's a pain in the ass to bring somebody over to it. You trust the car, the house. I try to fix most things myself, which is fine, but they're not done perfectly. They sometimes break again, and it takes a lot of time. I just want a house where I don't have things break down, a car where I don't have things break down, so I don't have to spend time and money stressing about it. And if that makes me spoiled rotten, fine. But that's what I think about with a house. But just a house that doesn't leak, please. That'd be great.
Yeah, I got a house that leaked, so you put on a new roof. It stops leaking.
Oh, I've done everything. So let me.
By the way, the fascinating thing about cars, I'm a car guy.
Sure.
The quality of cars that are being made today, with a few exceptions, but generally speaking, you go out and buy a used car that's 3, 4, 5 years old, they're practically as good as new. So I have a bunch of cars. Every year I lease something through the business that's my daily driver, but everything else I have or have had over the past couple of years. We're all bought a couple of years old, and you don't need to pay full price. As soon as it gets driven off the lot, it depreciates 20-30%.
What is old? A couple of years and how many miles on a car for you?
All right. So my weekend car, I picked up off lease. Somebody in Indianapolis had a lease and it expired. And I got a 3-year-old car with 30,000 miles that I paid half of what it was new, and knew it was 6 figures plus. I don't want to spend that much money on a car. My wife's daily driver, we picked up a year-old with 7,000 miles, and I paid, that's a 2 Series BMW. I think I paid 20,000 less than it would have been brand new because it had 7,000 miles, and it was the color combination she wanted. She wanted the convertible and stick shift.
No, I think that's really good, especially to hear from you, for people to hear from you. Everybody wants to buy a new car because of the symbolism of it all. It's not rational necessarily for most people. And I would just suggest that someone like you doesn't use the phrase "my daily driver," because obviously I was thinking about a person. But let me, this.
A daily driver is the car you drive daily.
I know. Right. I thought you were talking about Raul. But let's not talk about him. You say, though, the results of this experiment in this blog entry, you say you buy less stuff. You only buy good quality, better quality. You limit what you own. You save mental bandwidth. And I think most importantly for a lot of people, and the thing that I use as my most important value of currency is time. You save time.
So yesterday was Cyber Monday. I don't give a shit.
You don't want to find the deals, the things that you were thinking about getting, but yesterday would have been the day to get it.
No, I don't give a fuck. And the same with, Black Friday. And I stopped all that crap a long time ago. And so I'll share my one.
There's a video of you rushing into a Walmart and trampling a child.
Oh my God! You saw I tweeted that, right? I said the best thing about COVID is this bullshit doesn't happen this year.
It's the weirdest. I feel so bad for those people.
Now, to be fair, there are people who are really broke. Really
that's
poor,
what I mean. I feel sympathy.
The only way their kids are going to get whatever widget they want is getting it as the loss leader at Walmart. That's a bigger societal issue of having an underclass that is so poor, so far below the poverty level. That obviously that's not who that don't give a shit about prices is aimed at.
Fair enough.
I'm talking to to people who are making a little money, or middle class, and do you really want to spend your time and energy hunting for baubles. So true story.
But you're also giving people the advice. Sorry to interrupt, but you're giving people advice that to have more time, you can often find ways to make more money. Or how do you measure happiness? You can have more time to spend with the people you love, doing the things you like. Sorry,
that's right.
You're about to tell a story about.
That's a fair point. So this is a house we're probably going to spend the next 20, 30 years of our lives in. The house we were in before this was sort of an accident. We were in contract for our sale. The buy fell through. We scrambled. We ended up in the wrong place, the wrong town, wrong part. It wasn't where we wanted to be. It was by the water, it was by a park, but it wasn't the town we wanted to be in. And so we were there for about 5-6 years, and then we moved here when at the end of about 4 or 5 years after the financial crisis. What I discovered in the process of moving here was that the basement in the old house was filled with hundreds of boxes of crap. This is the same concept as flipping the hangers over in the closet that we just hadn't opened for the 6 years we were in that house.
Yeah.
So before we moved here, my wife we originally talked about, we'll move to the new house and deal with it. And I don't remember if it was her or me. It might have been her, said, no, let's go through this. What you want to keep, you keep. What we can donate, we'll donate. And everything else we'll throw away. And so we went through 100 boxes. We cut down to 20 what we wanted to keep. We gave away about 50 boxes of just all sorts of things, clothes and furniture and equipment. And, you buy crap and you never use it, or you use it once and it goes into the basement. And so we went from 2,000 square feet to 3,800 square feet with about 50% less stuff. So the house that's twice as big has less junk in it than the house that was, 1,800, 2,000 square feet.
That's always fascinating when people figure that out and how to consolidate.
It took me way too long to figure. I should have figured that out 20 years ago. Yeah. If it wasn't for the fact that we figured out, we can move out of the house that we bought sort of, we debated renting. We have too much crap to put into store. Back to all the accumulation of shit.
Someone should write, I bet you a billion people have written this, but I want you to write the blog post, and maybe you already have, about how having a lot of shit and actual physical clutter affects your the way that you live, the way that you think.
I think it weighs you down. People have written about that.
Dude, people have. But for me, it's absolutely everything. I'm so affected by my space, and I'm not great at it. Like when I'm saying I know my problem. Clutter is a problem for me. Physical clutter creates psychological clutter is what I was trying to say.
I mean, I look out the window so I don't see the mess behind me, but
But I have to keep on cleaning, keep up, making sure I'm as organized as I can. And it's always constant. Look at all the books I have piled up on the floor. Don't let me I don't even want to show my camera around my little space.
If you want, I won't.
My little space, but there's stuff everywhere.
So we're in about the same size space.
So anyway, the final piece I want to get to with you here is at your blog, Ridholtz.com, the big picture, everybody, depoliticizing your feed. You write, should you read it? The first paragraph is really good.
Sure, let me go to it.
You want me to read it?
No, I build my reputation on being a blunt, honest, and a bit off the center of mainstream. At the same time, no one wants to purposefully alienate half of their clients or listeners or readers. On occasion, it can be a challenge to thread that needle. So when Matt Phillips of the New York Times asked for some thoughts on markets in the age of Trump, I recognized how easily I could give offense, especially with the election barely over and nerves still raw. So rather than offering yet another hot take on policy or creating some unfounded market narrative, I went in a different direction. How to reduce the noise levels we all experience in the market. And so he went on to quote me about saying, I read the wrong paragraph. You wanted me to read the New York Times paragraph.
No, you read exactly what you're supposed to.
Okay. The money paragraph is, I just want my life to go back to normal, said Barry Ritholtz, a money manager in New York who did not vote for Mr. Trump. I know that might surprise a few of you. And I don't mean pre-pandemic normal. I mean pre-golden escalator to hell normal, he said, a reference to Mr. Trump's famous 2015 ride down the escalator in Trump Tower, at the end of which he announced his candidacy. I just want the noise level to quiet down, unquote. So that was a fun piece to be involved in because it was different than the usual sort of, blah, blah, blah. Everybody makes up a narrative after the fact.
But what does it mean to depoliticize your feed?
So I feel obligated as somebody who manages assets for clients to not slide into the sort of bubble that we all tend to find ourselves in. Hey, this is a little bubble right here. This is a little progressive left of center bubble. I live on the East Coast. I live in New York, although Nassau County, the county I live in, voted Trump this election. Last election, they voted Hillary, which is kind of fascinating. So you really have to make an effort to not slip into a bubble. And we all try with, various degrees of success. So I felt obligated, since I kind of troll Twitter as much as I do, to follow the president, his senior advisors, his press secretary, his this, his that. And, it's just a fire hose of endless bullshit. On the economic side, it's less bad. The various Federal Reserve and Treasury Department official statements, the BLS stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I've been following for years and is pretty legitimate. But I just didn't feel I would be doing my job if I wasn't keeping up with what the White House was saying on a weekly or daily basis. And the best part, there are many great parts about the outcome of this election. But to me, one of my favorite parts was that I no longer have to follow this cadre of grifters and liars and fraudsters and criminals. And so I just start unfollowing them all. And, first McEnany, not only did I unfollow her, she's such a lying witch. I blocked her. It was so delightful to just say, fuck you. I never have to hear anything out of your lying pie hole again. And, as you're working your way down the administration.
She actually joins us now in the conversation. Kaylee, what do you want to say to Barry Ritholtz after he called you a witch?
Right. I say this to you. So her first sentence was, I will not lie to you, the press and the American people. And her second sentence was a lie.
Yeah.
And basically it was downhill from there.
Yeah, I went out for drinks with her once. Just me and her boyfriend at the time, I think, and my producer Alfred.
Yeah,
she's nice.
So the fascinating thing, there was a fascinating article, I want to say Politico, a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
When it looked like it was going to be, a pretty substantial loss. And I don't think the outcome changed this. Where are all these people going to get jobs after this? They're tainted.
I actually don't think so. I used to
there's only so
think
many
that.
Fox News and right-wing think tanks that you could stick this. There are hundreds of wankers from this administration.
I used to think exactly that. And the one thought that I have that makes me think differently is that Donald Trump is a rock and roll star in many parts of this country. And if you had any tangential relationship with him or were working with him, you could probably go work at any firm in Oklahoma or Mississippi or Arkansas, some place where you don't think you could just go work almost anywhere in any industry if you were tangentially related or worked in this way. I used to think it's like you go for a job interview after this and the person interviewing you says, it says you worked in the Trump White House. Wasn't that when it was on fire? I mean, the house was on fire. You worked there next. But now I think it's like, ooh, we love Trump here. Come work for our real estate firm, our bank, our communications company.
Why not? Why? By the way, if
I have a Trump flag outside my house, I run a business, I run a firm, and I live in a red state, and Kaylee McEnany is going to come work for me? Oh, my God,
so what's she going to take a $50,000 a year job as the PR head for a local landscaping company? What are you talking about? I mean, normally, under normal circumstances.
The kind of money they want, the kind of firms that they'd have to work at.
Normally, they end up as the spokesman for Exxon.
Right. Former Bushies, former Obamas.
Google as the head of PR.
Yeah.
Not
George Stephanopoulos hosts The Week on ABC. He worked for Clinton.
I mean, the woman who I forget her name.
The Obama boys have the most popular podcast company in the company.
So you look at what they do. They go out and they get like, I don't think nobody from this White House is going to end up at a Fortune 500 company.
That is
at a
quite
C-level
a prediction, sir.
Right. I just don't see anybody. I'll tell you why. So I'll give you a perfect example.
Don't you think a lot of them get jobs in right-wing media?
There's only so many jobs in right-wing media.
I believe there are only so many jobs in media. That's why you do what I did. Any of them can do exactly what I've done. You just go create your own thing.
Let's say maybe. I mean,
make money. Pay me directly.
It's if Mike Bloomberg
Don
won,
Bongino is the most popular. That guy's making
blocked. He was part of that.
That doesn't matter. Yeah, good for you. But I'm saying your point.
I don't have to listen to that crap anymore.
No, that's not. No, your point about where are they going to work? And I'm saying for themselves, they're just going to talk into a microphone and launch a YouTube channel and make money.
Hypothetically, Mike Bloomberg wins the presidency, and I would have said, Mike, I want to be part of your communications team. And so someone like Stephanie Rule or Tim O'Brien would have been the guy at the podium, and I would have been, the number 2 or 3 guy writing out like that. That was, I could see that sort of thing. And you come out of that job and you basically run communications for Apple,
McDonald's,
run communications for, Zillow or pick something. There are 1,000 fantastic companies with great stock option packages.
You're saying
and you're set for life, and you get to do something.
No, you're right. You're right. No, you're absolutely right.
They're not getting those jobs.
That's better than making your own
scratch for
podcast.
as long as whatever is left over between Fox.
That'll be interesting. I'm going to hold you to that prediction, and we're going to follow. I'll follow closely because you have, sir, depoliticized your feed. This has been Depoliticizing Your Feed with Barry Ritholtz. Check out all of these blog entries, everybody, and I'll say all these things after I hit stop. But thank you very much, sir. That was so good. I love talking to you. I could talk to you for 10
Yeah, that was
hours.
fun. And I don't know who's going to listen to this for an hour, but
a lot of
get
people.
Me the audio, and I'll put it up on the blog.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
All righty.
All right. All right, there he goes, at Ridholtz, Barry Ridholtz. Check it out. Subscribe to his daily reads, listen to his podcast, and, of course, check out the blog, The Big Picture. His book, Bailout Nation, still also very relevant. All right, let me get to my second guest. I may have told you, you may have heard that I am working with this amazing organization for last month and this month, partnering with them to try to bring them more attention and hopefully more charitable donations, because nobody does it better than GiveWell. GiveWell.org/standup is where I want you to go, and they will match your donations. Well, I mentioned it during this conversation, but Dr. Neil Buddy Shah is the managing director of GiveWell, and I wanted to have a conversation with him to help explain why the work that he and his organization are doing is so vitally important and why you should donate to GiveWell. So here now, my conversation with the managing director of GiveWell.org, Dr. Neil Buddy Shah. All right, Dr. Neil Buddy Shah joins me now. Very excited to have you joining me on Stand Up. I have so many questions for you. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Pete. Thanks for having me.
All right, so can I just call you Buddy? Is that what your friends call you? Does that work?
Yeah, Buddy's perfect.
All right, so first of all, if someone were to just look you up and look at your bio, they'd see you have a bachelor's in economics from Harvard. You also have a medical degree. Is that what MD stands for? Medicine, degree of medicine. With special distinction, whatever that means, in global health policy, whatever I think that means, at a very important institution. And then you have another degree, and my question in master's degree, and my question is, how do you decide, how do you end up at GiveWell doing the work that you're doing when you could have obviously saved lives as a surgeon or as a doctor?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Pete. And it's definitely something that my family members and parents ask me quite a bit. I think the core reason why I ended up at a place like GiveWell, and frankly have been working in global development for the last decade plus, is that growing up as the child of immigrants, my parents are from Tanzania and India. We go to East Africa and India every single year. And that was just part of growing up and, nothing special beyond just vacations to visit extended family. But then when I was a freshman in college, I remember reading still really vividly this work of political philosophy by John Rawls called A Theory of Justice. And one of the ideas that Rawls talks about in that book is this idea of the lottery of life or the accident of birth, that basically where we were born determines so much of our life's prospects, to the point that, our success in life is determined by so many things outside of what we might think we quote unquote deserve. And when I was reading that book, I was just thinking about my cousins and relatives and other people that I meet on our annual summer holiday vacations to see family in Tanzania, Kenya, and India, who, especially at that time when those places were closed economies and extremely poor, were as smart as me, as hardworking, had similar types of parents that tried to invest in them, but their life outcomes and opportunities just looked dramatically different by this sheer accident of birth. And that once I started thinking in that way, something just clicked that, what I deserve, even in terms of how hard I work. A lot of psychologists now are starting to learn that a lot of that is is determined not by your own effort, but by things like your upbringing and genetics, that it seems fundamentally unfair that so much of one's life outcomes, your ability to just lead a fulfilling and meaningful life, is determined by this accident of birth and this lottery of life. And that basically got me on this journey of thinking about, well, what can I do personally? Because I've been so lucky where others that I know very well have been less so, to actually try to reverse or mitigate the effects of this birth lottery on people's life outcomes. And my first thought was that, I'm going to be a doctor, help to save lives. But then going through medical training and education, I think, I saw two pretty big things. One is that the vast majority of people that are showing up, even when you're working in underserved areas, if you are able to solve some public policy or some public health challenge ahead of time, they would never even have to show up to the doctor's office in the first place. And so that if you're a physician, you're almost getting them too late in the game. And the second was that a lot of these problems are just so much more pronounced if you go to the lowest income, poorest parts of the world. And so that whole line of reasoning and those experiences really led me to ask this question. I've been super fortunate, for really no benefit of my own, to be in a position to help others. And in order to do that, how can I do it most effectively? And I think that the answer for me, at least personally, was to devote my career to trying to improve the lives of people living in the lowest income parts of the world, and to do it in the most kind of scalable, systems level way rather than individual level way, just because I saw, how frequently someone who might get sick would come to a doctor at a late stage, when you could just implement policies or programs that would prevent them from coming there in the first place, or allow them to go back into society with more opportunities. And so that was kind of my personal journey and how I've come to GiveWell despite my background.
Well, that's super fascinating in terms of the John Rawls essay, your birth and obviously your perspective in terms of traveling and being from an immigrant family. And also, of course, the fact that you've actually spent a lot of time working on poverty and extreme poverty in several different countries. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I worked at the World Bank in India, MIT's Poverty Action Lab in India, and then in my previous role, really all over the world, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and all across Africa. And before joining GiveWell, was spending around almost half of my time in all those places and half my time in the U.S.
How important is it for people who work in the field of public health to try to make people's health outcomes better in their communities, in their state, in their countries? Is it to actually go and travel and see not only poverty, but extreme poverty and live amongst those communities to try to understand the catalysts and causes of the problems so that you can start to look at the solutions. Because, I mean, you can go to Harvard and get your degree or any school in public health, but to actually spend time in the communities that you're trying to affect, I would imagine, I don't know that it's necessary with an internship or so on, but I would imagine your experiences working with the organizations you've worked with and in those countries colored and educated your opinions and thoughts, and of course, how you ended up at GiveWell.
Yeah, I think it's really important.
Because I've never, and most people have never, gone and spent time in a community where they were in extreme poverty, much less necessarily poverty.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important, and probably for a couple of reasons. The first is, that to sustain a career for a long period of time and to be devoted to this impact, I do think that feeling as though the work you're doing is not some disembodied group of people halfway across the world, but where you have real relationships with those communities and understand the types of challenges they face from a very selfish point of view, helps to sustain people working in this field's energy and motivation. I think the second is that so much of what works and what doesn't in international development or public health abroad is tied up in the very real constraints that people face living in extreme poverty. And so if you don't actually have some amount of interaction and understanding of those lives, you're never going to fully understand it. But those conversations really help you to identify what are the challenges that these people face and what are the ways in which programs that seem really impactful could go wrong. But I think the important thing is that you have to marry that firsthand knowledge with really hard-headed analysis, because there is a lot of well-intentioned work and folks that are spending a lot of time in communities that still can learn a lot from looking at the numbers. And so I think there's something about the sweet spot between spending a lot of time in the communities and with people that are trying to improve their lot in life. Those communities are often the ones that have many of the best ideas, but then trying to combine that with all of the numbers and taking a hard look at what actually works and what doesn't.
It must be fascinating for someone with your experience to witness Americans who have dealt with a kind of, I think, a myth of American exceptionalism. Nothing has bared that more than the pandemic, versus people who have dealt with these kinds of dangerous health issues their entire lives in their community. When we talk about GiveWell, we talk about things like malaria. People living in fear of being bitten by a mosquito is much different than Americans whose, worst fear often is losing their job or losing their health insurance or some other health issues, of course. But now, with COVID-19 and a pandemic, and now we're even talking about COVID, I think it's COVID fatigue, some people are calling it, exhaustion. We've been under these regulations trying to live this way for so long. We can't do it anymore. It must be really interesting for you, given your perspective and working on the issues that you've worked on, to watch us here in the country you grew up in have a really difficult time dealing with just staying home.
Yeah, and I think
and I don't mean to minimize that, folks, just staying home. It's not easy. And if you have to go to work, I mean, it's different. I didn't mean to be flip with that, but still, you know what I meant, buddy.
Yeah, for sure. But I think what that really makes me think is that human behavior change is really hard, even when people know the risks and benefits of doing something, right? So on the one hand, I definitely feel this urge, here in the U.S. at home, that we know what can stop or slow the spread of COVID, whether that's wearing masks or staying home, but also have a degree of empathy for how hard it is for people to actually do the things that are going to help themselves and their loved ones, because I see it all the time overseas. Just a simple example, that there are a lot of people that don't get immunized in the developing world. A big portion of that is because they don't have access to it or knowledge about its benefits. But there are this, set of people who really love their kids living in low income environments, and I'm talking about extreme poverty. So under $1 or $2 a day is what they're living on, that actually do know that if I immunize my kids, it will help. But because their lives are so busy, they have so many different challenges, just, traveling through a rural part of Nigeria or the Congo to get to a clinic is a behavioral hurdle, in the same way that like we might struggle to go to the gym or do something as quotidian as that. And that if you just provide a small behavioral nudge in those environments, you can actually incentivize people with just a couple of dollars to go and travel to get immunized and actually potentially save the life of their kids. And so, I think that the scale of the problems are so dramatically different, but some of the underlying human behavioral characteristics are very similar in that we often know what can help us or our loved ones, but for whatever reason have a hard time actually following through on that.
So well said. And I mean, there's so much to talk about in terms of behavior. I want to stay on track, though, and just ask you to help me define the moral philosophy that GiveWell is based on, which is effective altruism. You studied these issues. Philosophy is what we're talking about. Moral reasoning, moral philosophy. And I guess there's a kind of a normative moral reasoning and moral philosophy that most human beings agree to, although certainly not all. Things like, anti-slavery and women should have the right to vote or equal rights and things like that. Of course, they're not the same all over the world, much less our country. But there's a norm, and then there's obviously all the exceptions that we can talk about and figure out. But we're talking specifically about effective altruism. How did you come to it, and how do you understand it, and how do we define it for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, so, I think the easiest place to start is from this thought experiment, which a lot of people probably know. Peter Singer and others have used it with, you're walking through the woods or Central Park, let's say, and you see a child drowning in a pond. And, you've got a new suit on and a new pair of shoes, which you spend a couple $100s on, and there's no one else around to stop that child from drowning in the pond. You can jump in, easily save that child's life. But what it means is that you're going to essentially waste several $100s because you don't have time to take off your shoes and your suit and all the rest. Would you jump in and save that child's life? And everyone's intuitive reaction is obviously you'd be a monster not to jump in and save that child's life just to avoid ruining your suit and shoes. But the reality is that we're making those types of choices every day because there are kids dying from causes that we can prevent with relatively low amounts of money that would still allow us to live the kinds of lives we live today, but just probably spending a little bit less on the finer things in life that we currently enjoy. And so what's the moral difference between letting that kid drown in the pond versus foregoing some of our niceties and donating that to proven cost-effective ways to save the lives of kids? And I think that the core answer is that it's that we don't see it in front of our faces, but It doesn't necessarily make the reality any different. And so it's that type of thinking that, we have a certain moral obligation to save lives when we are able to, that animates GiveWell's work and effective altruism. And GiveWell's really devoted to finding the absolute best, most cost-effective ways to turn dollars into improved or saved lives. And so when we think about how to improve the world, we're thinking about it very much from this consequentialist point of view of, what is the true impact or effect of an action? And if there are people dying that we can prevent, then let's try to find the best ways to do that and save as many lives per dollar as possible. So that's a basic approach and way of thinking that animates a lot of what GiveWell does.
So it would seem that the research points to the fact that your dollar will do the most good. Your dollar will go the furthest in the areas where people are living in the most extreme circumstances and poverty and so on. And it would seem that most of those places are outside this country. But how do we talk to people about giving and making charitable donations to organizations that go to people living in other countries versus a bias that somebody might have about improving the community that they live in, which I guess, by the way, is kind of the definition of altruism. You're doing something to help other people that doesn't necessarily have any benefit to you other than how it makes you kind of feel. I guess that's still going to paint somebody's donation. How do you talk to people about where their donation goes in terms of their own community, their own country, versus it going so much further in a number of other underdeveloped or undeveloped countries?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough question. And obviously the first and most important step on anyone's journey is probably to think less about oneself and more about others.
Right.
And that's definitely something that, I continue to struggle with and try to do better at. And so it's not to necessarily put down people that do want to support causes close to home. But I think the way that I think about it and the way that GiveWell thinks about it is, if you start from the fundamental assumption that all human lives have equal value, and that whether someone lives down the street or 3,000 miles from me, that's still a human who's equally deserving of the opportunity to live a meaningful and fulfilling life, then that starts to get you to think about, well, if I do think all humans have equal value, then how can I improve as many human lives as much as possible with the limited resources that I have? And if you start down that path, I think what you quickly realize is that the scale of suffering, there's a lot of worthy causes here in the US at home, but the scale of suffering is just really different, right? So one country in which GiveWell works a lot is the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in the Democratic Republic of Congo, kids are 10 times more likely to die before they're 5 than they are in the US. And if you think about poverty, the scale of poverty there versus poverty here, an average person living in the Democratic Republic of Congo is living on just a couple of dollars a day. And even a low income person in the US probably makes 10 to 20, 30 times more. And then the final fact is that a lot of the causes of death in the poorest parts of the world are actually from things that are really cheap to solve and we know how to solve. And so when you put all those things together, valuing all human lives equally and then trying to improve as many human lives as possible with your dollar, I think it does imply that it's worth a hard look at donating to and engaging in programs that affect communities in the absolute poorest parts of the world.
I think the most interesting thing that GiveWell does is obviously the research and the criteria that you have, but it's also interesting to answer the question, who gets to decide what's best? How does a bunch of academics and researchers at GiveWell decide what's best for people living in poverty in the Congo? And how you go about that is really interesting. Explain how you evaluate what's best for people living in another culture or geography, frankly, when you're not from that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important consideration. And our starting point is, what are the fairly uncontroversial things that people really want? And two that immediately come to mind are things that improve people's health, so life-saving interventions, and things that improve people's material well-being, especially when you're at very low levels of income. And so a lot of GiveWell's focus are on finding the absolute best programs that either save lives the most per dollar or improve people's incomes the most per dollar. And so if you look at all the places where GiveWell directs funding and recommends that donors give, it is really in those areas which are fairly non-controversial, because we know that people in those communities really value health and improvements in their material well-being. Now, things become a lot more complicated when we're trying to decide how much money to devote to programs that actually save people's lives versus how much money to devote to programs that improve their incomes. And that's something that most people don't even really think about. When you're thinking about doing good, a lot of people start from the place, well, what do I care about? I care about education, or I care about health. So I'll just give there. But if you're truly devoted to this question of, we've got a fixed amount of money, how do we improve human well-being the most with that fixed amount of money? It does require you to start asking some pretty hard and uncomfortable questions around, we could spend some of this money to save someone's life, or we could spend that same money to improve people's incomes. Which ones do you choose? How do you trade off between life and death versus improvements in people's material well-being? And those are some of the hard, uncomfortable questions that we do try to engage with, because whether we make it explicit or not, that's essentially what everyone does, whether it's a government, an individual, or foundation, when they're trying to figure out how to do good in the world.
It is a really difficult question. I'm trying to imagine how that would go. I mean, saving this life versus improving all of these lives. How do you answer that question? How have you answered that question?
Yeah, so we've thought about it in two ways. One is to actually do the moral reasoning and try to think through it. So let's say that you've got $10,000 to donate, and based on GiveWell's research, that $10,000 you have a pretty high degree of confidence is going to save the life of, let's say, 3 or 4 people, or two to four kids. So you can actually save the life of 2 to 4 kids who otherwise would have died. Or you can take that $10,000 and double the incomes of a larger number of households that live in extreme poverty, under $2 a day. And so one of the things that we do is actually just debate and discuss what's the point at which it's worth it to forego saving someone's life because you're able to double the income or consumption of enough households living in extreme poverty that it seems worth it. So that's one way that we try to get at this and make our own internal decisions around whether to invest in life-saving programs versus income-improving programs. But the second, and I think really important one that we've invested in, is actually doing these thought experiments and surveying the people who are affected by the program.
Right.
And it's kind of crazy when you think about how many large-scale funding decisions are made, whether that's by the World Bank, U.S. government's foreign aid division, large foundations, the WHO, that are doing all this technocratic analysis, but very often don't do the work of going to the communities that are affected by programs and actually say, hey, look, we've got X million dollars earmarked for this area. And this includes, by the way, national governments in all parts of the world that are spending the most of this money, and say, how would you trade off investing X amount in public health that's likely to save this many lives versus investing in some economic development program that's expected to improve your incomes by Y amount. And so GiveWell's actually invested in doing large scale surveys and thought experiments with people affected by these programs in Kenya, Ghana, and planning elsewhere to actually inform our questions and to inform how we make these resource allocation decisions. And I think that's something that, frankly, we should be doing a lot more of in all of the power centers, whether that's, in Lagos, Nigeria, or Delhi, India, Geneva, or, London and New York. Anyone who's trying to figure out how to do good in the world should also be surveying the preferences of the people that are affected by the programs.
That is, I think, the kind of the most important thing that I learned in researching your work and getting ready to talk to you and partner with GiveWell is the moral preferences of the beneficiaries question, and the fact that you at your organization actually do that work. You go and ask the people, how is it done? Is it poll questions? Is it town halls? And what kinds of things have you learned anywhere that maybe changed or maybe altered the programs that you guys end up funding? That, to me, is the most fascinating thing, to ask the people who you're trying to help what they want and how it will go the furthest.
Yeah, I mean, we've learned a lot from that, and we partner with an organization called ID Insight to conduct that work in Kenya and Ghana. Mm-hmm. A couple of things that have come out from that. One is that it is really hard to even have these conversations, right? So if I ask you right now, how much money would you need to have in order to forego X years of your life? Or how much, how many people's incomes in your community would you have to double for you to forego saving the life of someone in the place where you live? That's just really hard for me to think about. That's really hard for you to think about.
Yeah.
And so doing these surveys where you're surveying thousands of people with these questions requires almost going through like a mini moral reasoning boot camp.
Yeah.
To actually get people to understand the question and engage with it. And so there's been a lot of work on how do you actually do these thought experiments well in places with low literacy and with people facing these hard trade-offs. And I think the second thing that we've learned from these surveys after doing all that work is that compared to what some of the decisions we might have made thinking through these problems, there seems to be initially, based on initial results, a stronger preference for life-saving or health-improving interventions than consumption or income-improving interventions. And, there's a lot to unpack there, but those are some of the early trends that we're seeing from these surveys. And what that means for our portfolio is that, last year, GiveWell directed over $150 million based on our community of donors, is that a larger share of that money is likely to go to life-saving programs versus income-improving programs, because that seems to be the preferences of the communities in rural parts of sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere that are most affected by these programs.
And let me just mention real quick here that anybody who decides to donate right now to GiveWell, givewell.org/standup, your first donation will be matched up to $250, which is awesome. But how do you decide, or if someone does make a donation, how do they know which charity it's going to go to? How have you selected your top charities at GiveWell? I think this is where really what makes you unique is exactly how you decide and select these top charities, and what makes you different, and how come you're not considered a charity navigator?
Yeah, it's a good question, and basically the core of it
wasn't well constructed. And I asked you two questions. It wasn't great. You said that it was because you're being kind, but it wasn't. It was fucked up, and I got my brain froze. But you still know it's still out there for you to answer, buddy. I'm sorry.
I think it's an important question, regardless of the construction.
Okay, thank you. I'll take it.
So I think the main thing that we're really focused on is, what are you buying with your dollar? And really what you're trying to buy with your dollar are improvements in the well-being of other people. And so we're not that concerned with organizations' overhead rates or even the outputs of what they do. How many materials are they buying? How many people do they employ? What we're really spending thousands of hours researching every year is, for a given amount of money, how many lives are you saving, or how much are you improving the incomes of people? And so the focus is really on deeply understanding the return on investment of every philanthropic dollar spent in terms of outcomes that people actually care about, which is the amount that you're improving people's lives. And the way that we do that is really using a lot of the gold standard methodologies to figure out whether something works or not. So in the US, for every new medication that comes into the market, the FDA requires that you run a randomized controlled trial of that medication. So you basically, to figure out whether it works or not in improving people's health, you take a bunch of patients and you randomly select half of them to get the new pill, you randomly select the other half to get a placebo or the old pill, and then you just track differences between those two groups.
Right.
And that's the way that you truly know whether it works or not.
Right.
And in the same way, all of GiveWell's top charities have undergone that level of gold standard research, where we're actually comparing these programs based on randomized controlled trials in the field across Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, to see to what extent are they improving lives. And the result of all of that research that GiveWell does to figure out whether something works or not is this pretty short list of causes. So there are a number in the malaria space. So anti-malarial bed nets that prevent people from getting bit by mosquitoes that give them malaria. It's just $5 for both the procurement and distribution of anti-malarial bed nets. And we estimate that you can provide these bed nets to 800 people. That prevents many people from getting sick from malaria and actually prevents the death of someone from malaria. Vitamin A supplementation, it's just $1 to supplement someone's diet with a vitamin A pill. And that actually, if you do that enough, that also saves lives of people from measles, diarrhea, respiratory infections. And again, that comes out to about $3,000 per life saved. And so between life-saving programs like anti-malaria, vitamin A supplementation, and incentivizing people to get immunized, to income-improving programs like direct cash transfers, or providing deworming medications for kids that get parasitic worms that prevent their development and future earnings. All of it is based on looking at the academic literature and seeing what actually works, and then vetting the organizations that are delivering them, making sure that they're continuing to deliver those programs at really high quality in some of the hardest to work places in the world. And that's all the background work that goes into the GiveWell recommendation. And
I think that's what makes it so easy to give well, because if you're a person who cares about research and scientific in science in action, randomized controlled studies in terms of this training programs that motivate people to work, and obviously these remedies and therapies and cures for diseases, what you're doing apparently, and tell me if this makes sense, is you guys do the research to know that bed nets work. But then you do the research to make sure that the bed nets are getting to the right place. But then you do the research and accountability and action to make sure that once they get to the right place, the bed nets are being used correctly and distributed equitably. That's what you guys do. So I can know that my donation, my dollar goes the furthest, right? How did I do with the bed net analogy?
Yeah, I mean, you did it much better than I did, Pete. And I think that's exactly right. And each of those components is super important, right? So yeah, it's not enough to just look at the academic evidence and say, oh, it looks like bed nets can save lives if they're implemented well. Then you actually, and what GiveWell does is do the due diligence to find the organizations that do that really effectively, and then provide the incentives and accountability and ongoing tracking to make sure that that's being delivered on the ground effectively. And then when you put those together, both the academic knowledge of what works theoretically, if done well, plus the ongoing monitoring and accountability and conversation with these great organizations to make sure that it's continuing to happen with high fidelity in some very challenging places. I think the end result, hopefully, and we believe, is a lot of confidence that these are some of the best places for your marginal dollar to actually improve lives. All
right. Is there any question I didn't ask, or is there a point that you want to make here at the end that didn't get made to convince everybody listening right now that at this time of giving, their charitable donation will go the furthest if you start at GiveWell.org?
I think we covered a lot of it. I know from my experience in talking with friends that personal giving it's a very personal decision, and there are a lot of things that go into it. But one of the journeys that I've been on, and I think that we talk a lot about internally at GiveWell, is how do we expand the circle of our moral concern? It's just very easy to forget the scale of suffering that's happening halfway across the world. And I think a lot of people don't know just how actionable and relatively low cost it is to be able to save someone's life or improve someone's life by being really smart and rational and evidence-based about where you give. And so I just encourage folks to think about some of those hard questions of, if your goal really is to improve lives as much as possible, and you think all humans are equal and equally deserving of an opportunity to a meaningful and fulfilling life, then I do think that starts to take you on a journey to consider giving to some of the poorest places on the earth where we have really proven cost-effective ways to save or improve folks' lives. And that's a challenging personal journey. But I think those are some of the most important questions we can be asking ourselves during this holiday season.
It's the personal journey I've been on for a long time. It is really challenging, and I have a million more questions for you, and I look forward to doing part 2, 3, and 4 of our conversation. It's been great getting to know you and talking to you, and thank you, buddy, so much for joining me. Dr. Neil Buddy Shah, GiveWell.org/standup. Go now, everybody. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Appreciate it.
All right, Dr. Neil Buddy Shah, GiveWell.org/stand up. Give $5, give $10, whatever. It'll be really helpful for the show, for us to get more sponsorships and fund this show, working with and promoting awesome causes and awesome nonprofits. All right, that's it. I got to get to bed. I can't even talk anymore. Listen to me. Crazy. I'm tired. But thank you so much for joining me. I hope you'll join me Thursday at 8 p.m. on the Hangout. You can get the link if you're a subscriber. If not, just go to the paid subscription link in the show notes and be a part of our community. If you've never joined one of these Hangouts, you don't know what you're missing. It's really inspiring, connecting with people from all over the country, sharing stories, joking around, busting chops, or just sitting there listening and being part of it. You don't even have to engage. I hope to see you there Thursday at 8 p.m. And we're always chatting on the Discord platform. Someone's always up and chatting in there. So you're never alone, I say, here on the podcast. If you're a member of the stand-up community, I hope that you'll join. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.